How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the Ride Along. This is Jay Williamson here with our next amazing guest, Jakub Mosur. He's a 2000 graduate of San Francisco State University's journalism department. He has been an independent photojournalist for over 21 years. He interned at the San Francisco Examiner, the Dubois Telegraph. Mosur then went on to freelance for a variety of journalistic clients, some of which include the Associated Press, Boston Globe, LA Times, and several others. Following the 2008 downturn in the newspaper industry, Mosur began working with more education, nonprofit, and corporate clients, some of which include the Hearst Foundation, Salesforce, Facebook, UC Berkeley, and Harvard Law. So he has a very extensive background and really knows what he's talking about. He currently lives in San Francisco with his wife, Erin. She's also a fellow SFSU alum and photojournalist. They have an 11-year-old daughter, Zoisha, and 4-year-old daughter, Maya. So very excited to hear from this. I actually met Mr. Mosur in a scholarship group sponsored by the Hearst Foundation in 2018. I know he has a lot of really interesting insights to share. So let's just pop off with the first question that we like to ask is why you decided to pursue, a career in photojournalism.
Well, Jay, thank you so much for having me on your show. This is an exciting thing that you're doing for high school students. I think it's very important for mentorship and to kind of get information out to them so they can make the right decisions as they enter a career path. So yeah, going back to your question, I, as a young child, was always really interested in history, and I've pursued historical information everywhere I could find it. And in fact, my family had emigrated to the United States in the 80s. And when we escaped my country of Poland back in 1984, we ended up in Athens, Greece. And in Athens, Greece, we lived with all these other refugees at a special building in the capital of that country. And on the weekends, my parents would take me to the Acropolis almost every weekend. And this is the big temple complex that was built roughly around 2,500 years ago by the Athenians. And I just found it so fascinating walking down these paths around the Parthenon and looking at the historical structures and learning about the philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle that would have walked in these areas, or Pericles, or many others, and just kind of sparked a love of history. And during this time, I, of course, didn't speak any English. So once we arrived in the United States, one of the ways of my parents, my dad especially, to get us to learn to speak English, he'd take us to the public library. And in the public library, I would pick up all these books about history and philosophy and learn more about it. And that's where I totally fell in love with it. And on the other side, though, I also had a great interest in the visual arts. And as a high school student, I did a lot of drawing and illustrating, and I wanted to improve my skills. So I decided to take pictures of my subjects. And as a gift, my dad gave me this camera right here.
Awesome.
It's a Practica. This camera was made in East Germany. And when he was visiting East Berlin back in it was late 60s, early 70s, he picked this camera up. This is the camera he took with him. He got this opportunity when he was finishing up high school. He got like a scholarship program to go visit Egypt. And he took this camera with him to go to Cairo and photographed the Great Pyramids. This thing right here.
Absolutely insane.
Yeah, so he gave this to me when I was in high school, and basically it melded together two amazing things: my love of the visual arts and my love of history. I'm like, I need to be a photojournalist.
Right. And so did you go into college thinking that's exactly what you wanted to do, or was it more just journalism in general?
I initially took a year off after I had graduated early. So I was held back one grade when I first arrived to the United States, and because my English wasn't very good. And my teacher, Mr. Fisher at Brooklyn Elementary in San Diego, said, might be better off to keep him back. And I went into ESL, which is called English for Second, it's English for as a second language.
Uh,
That's what it was called at the time. And I went into the class. Of course, it was mostly kids coming from Mexico and Guatemala and El Salvador. So they were all speaking Spanish, and I was this one lone Polish-speaking kid in class. And so they decided to throw me in to just the general population, and it was sink or swim. And I just worked hard and learned the language. And eventually, I went when I graduated from high school. I had taken some art photo classes. In fact, I found this badge.
oh,
Um,
wow.
this
We're
is
getting
my
all the growth.
first.
Awesome.
So Jakub Mosur right there, a journalism badge. This is from Mrs. Howe's class. This is her newspaper class
Uh-huh.
at School of Creative and Performing Arts in San Diego. That's where the high school I went to.
That is cool.
And so I go back all the way. I think this is from 1992,
Uh-huh.
this picture. So
Pre-beer.
yeah, 92, 93. And so I ended up studying photography even then
Mhm.
and wanted to get into art photography. And that's how, after I took a year break, I applied to San Francisco State and got in the spring semester of 1995 in the
Mhm.
art department and started taking pictures in the art department. And I had a friend in that class who said, hey, I know you really like taking pictures. There's a department where you can take a lot more. It's
Right.
called the journalism department. So I went in there into journalism, and my first teacher was her name is Liz Mangelsdorf, who was a photographer at the San Francisco Examiner at the time, and she had photographed the earthquake in 1989 after she had graduated from school in Arizona. And she was just so excited talking about these experiences she had firsthand. And I was hooked from that moment on, having Liz as my teacher. And ironically, later on, she became my mentor and helped me get
Wow.
my first internship at the San Francisco Examiner that
Wow.
turned into a freelance position. And yeah, she gave me this great opportunity.
Right.
And at the time, that was a Hearst paper.
Well, there we go. It all,
I'm sure you're probably understanding the tie-in here.
uh,
And eventually, I applied for a Hearst scholarship back
oh,
in
wow.
1999, and I
Mhm.
got into the final shoot off, and that's when I received this. I got a second
Like,
place.
oh, wow. That is a cool award, though.
Yeah, it's from the Hearst Foundation.
Mhm.
So William Randolph Hearst, who of course was the famous newspaper man from the turn of the century. He
Yes.
had been the son of a Hearst who was a senator who had before that had uh, been a mining entrepreneur, I guess would be the best way to put it. He
That's a word you.
found found the Comstock lode in California, well, Nevada, and made riches off of it. Eventually, led the uh, mining in South Dakota and Black Hills. So yeah, fascinating man. Of course, was involved, unfortunately, with a little bit of smearing of the Spanish
A
during
little bit.
the explosion of the USS Maine.
Mhm.
So, which got the United States into a big conflict with Spain back in 1898. That Teddy Roosevelt led a charge, cavalry charge in
Right.
Cuba, and that's how we ended up getting Cuba, Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico in that conflict.
Mhm.
So yeah, as you can see, I love history a lot,
History.
and
Oh, definitely.
it leads me in all these paths, and I see all these connections
Mhm.
through just not my professional career, but just in the world.
Were you ever torn, at least maybe in college, between pursuing history and becoming just a historian and then photojournalism? Like, was there ever a big
Yes,
question of which one you wanted to pursue?
I in fact was
You wanted to do
looking into
both?
doing double major
Uh,
history and journalism, and unfortunately because I got so many work opportunities,
right.
I didn't take enough courses to complete my historical major. So I was like a dum dum. I was maybe like 6 or 7 units short
Oh,
of doing that. I'm like, but I was getting like all this work from the examiner, from
mhm.
AP,
Yeah,
and
it's
getting
great
all these.
talking to kind of how that works. Like, you're a college student, you're 2021. How, you're working for maybe the local San Francisco State paper. How does that get plugged into the big, you know?
Yeah, so okay. I basically I started working professionally, and by that I mean selling my photos
Mhm.
when I was still in school.
Gotcha.
I had a lot of my colleagues, they basically, what they were thinking is, I'll pursue my college career, I'll get a degree, and then I'll apply for a job, sometimes an internship,
Hmm.
and do it that way. For me, because of my experience with my parents coming to America, not having much money, I always saw them working their butts off. They were doing like 2, 3 jobs left and right, always trying to figure things out, trying to keep things afloat. So as I was going through, my parents didn't have much money. So basically, I was paying for my tuition. I was paying for a lot of my college education. And
Hmm.
I was working at Kinko's Good Guys, which was an electronics store, getting job experience.
Hmm.
And then when I was working for my school paper, I had an assignment to photograph the drama department, and I made some friends there. And
Hmm.
they asked me, "Hey, would you be able to do some headshots for us?"
Okay.
And I'm thinking, "Sure, why not? How
Hmm.
much would you pay me?" And they said, "We could pay you $50. That's how much it costs to get it done." I'm like, "Oh my God, yeah."
All
Because
right.
back in those days, I had to pay for film, and it was pretty expensive
Right.
major to do. So basically, I used my photography to
Help.
help me pay to educate myself.
Wow. That's
And
nice.
then eventually that led to other assignments and other opportunities. And then one of those people that were in that drama department at the time was a friend of mine from high school, even a guy by the name of David Owen. He eventually ended up starting up his own comedy troupe that he did back in the late 90s, and he had me photograph all their promotional images, and I did that. And then they ended up starting a comedy festival in San Francisco called SF Sketchfest, which is one of the biggest phenomena in San Francisco. Happens every January. We get tons of comedians. I don't know if you were at my Facebook page today, but
I
uh,
haven't looked at your. I have seen some of the stuff from it.
so I shared a story of how I met Jamie Lee Curtis
Oh wow.
because her husband came for the Best in Show reunion, and we
Mhm.
had the Best in Show. So if you scroll down to see my Facebook page from this morning, you'll see my Jamie Lee Curtis, well, my
Awesome.
photographs of them. So
That's crazy. A friend who starts their own comedy troupe and then it turns into a phenomenon in San Francisco that is too. That's great. So then,
yep.
how did you get? Did you just know people that were at the San Francisco Examiner? Did you show them your work? Like, how did you get the job with them?
So yeah, when I first applied as an intern, basically in photojournalism,
Hmm.
so this kind of goes on to one of your other questions I think you might have had, is how has technology changed things?
Right.
So when I first came into the photo department, we would develop, basically photograph everything on film. We
Hmm.
develop our pictures and make prints and then turn those prints into halftones so they'd be ready for print.
Hmm.
So during that very first year, we transitioned from me having to make prints to scanning the negatives onto a computer and then putting them on a digital program that would basically halftone for you in the program.
Hmm.
By the time I graduated in 2000, we started using digital cameras, so even bypassing the film. So I saw transition that, I mean, you
Really changed the
probably,
game.
yeah, well, it changed the game in such a humongous way that
Mhm.
these kind of transitions happened in the lifetime of some photographers. The transition from scanning to not scanning
Oh
was
yeah,
like 40, 50 years, but I experienced all those steps like within that 95 to 2000 year
that's crazy.
span. So
Mhm.
it changed things a lot. Of course, the first digital cameras weren't that high quality. They were very expensive. The
Mhm.
first one I used was in Dubuque, Iowa, my second internship that I did in the spring of 1999. And basically, it was this hunky giant camera that cost around $50,000.
Wow.
15,000. It's 1 5
I'm
with
just
three
breaking out in
zeros.
sweats right now.
And it produced a picture that was about 7 megabytes in size when it was open in Photoshop. So it's tiny, tiny. I mean, your phone can do much better
Right.
than those first pictures, or they're minuscule. But
Mhm.
that's how it was. The technology, as it got better, to this point, our cameras have so much more clarity and so much more resolution than any film that was able to be produced. Maybe a large size format negative could match up to what today's digital technology is, but because the way film works is that there's physical limitations in the way the physics and the way
Mhm.
the chemistry works, that you cannot get a finer piece of silver sensitive molecular structures to be
Mhm.
able to get the same clarity with the nanotechnology that we have that you can get on a CCD.
So
So
for someone who's like a total novice when it comes to cameras and film and all that, how big have the changes been since 2000, when the digital camera started getting implemented? Like how much technology improvement has there been that has
oh,
changed?
it's been humongous. I mean, the way digital cameras work is there's these plateaus that are reached.
Right.
So there's a new thing that happens. So when you look at it on a day-to-day basis, like, oh, my camera model that I have today is not really that much different than the one that I had 10 years ago or even 15 years ago. But
Mhm.
the minute differences eventually, when you look at from today's camera to the way it was 25 years ago, humongous difference. I mean, my DSLR that I use today compared to this,
Mhm.
it's night and day. I can connect with my new camera to Wi-Fi. I
Wow.
can I can basically distribute my image the moment I take it. I can edit it. So basically, what I can do is I can take a photograph, send it to my iPhone, where at that point I can tweak it in Lightroom or Photoshop that I have installed on my phone, and then send it off to my client right there and then.
Gotcha.
I mean, that's it's
Mhm.
unimaginable. Before, I would have to take a picture, find a place to develop it, either by hand if it was black and white, or at a lab if it was in color,
Mhm.
and then scan it and transmit it.
So
And it
right.
would take me, so if I had an AP assignment and I got sent out to photograph, like I mentioned in my Facebook post recently, Sam Shepard,
Mhm.
I photographed him. He was doing a play back in 2000. So I photographed him, had to go get my pictures developed. I think I went to Walgreens at that moment. It was a drugstore. Get it
Mhm.
developed and then run back to my house, scan it, and then
Wow.
transmit it to Associated Press so they can have it on deadline. The whole process took me about an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Versus now,
So
just
versus now, it's like I can be on the spot, just get it out,
yeah.
immediately.
So whenever you're, working for all these freelance different groups, what is like the daily life like? Do they contract you out for this event, or is there like
Uh,
a ability in what that looks like?
So when I used to work for newspapers, which
Mhm.
I don't do as much anymore, the last one I'm still working with is the Boston Globe, and thank you,
Mhm.
Boston Globe, for supporting me all these years. Basically, what I do is I get a phone call or an email asking me if I'm available at a set time and date,
Mhm.
and I get some information about the photo subject. Sometimes will do some research about them, find out exactly who they are, what they've done,
Right.
and or I mean, that's one example. Basically, I'll go to their home or their place of work, do a portrait of them, and then transmit the images to my client from there.
Mhm.
Sometimes the assignments could be a sporting event. So I'll go stand on the sidelines if it's a football game, or sit in a dugout if it's a baseball game,
Right.
and basically photograph, transmit on site. If it's a press conference, it's a whole different matter. I photographed a press conference with Al Gore when he received the Nobel Peace Prize once, back in the 2000s, and basically it was him talking to all these other press people like myself.
Mhm.
And you have TV people there, you have newspaper people there.
So is
So
there
yeah, you
a lot
just
of travel at that point when you were working for all these different newspapers? Kind of.
A little bit. Was mostly like I was centered in the San Francisco Bay Area, and if
Mhm.
they needed something in Northern California, which is a fairly large region,
Right.
I would have, if I had an assignment in Modesto, I would drive out there. I had an assignment for Boston Globe photographing Nevada City, which is this major place for independent music labels to do their music. So I
Mhm.
spent a whole day photographing out there, and that's, I don't know, about 4 hours from San Francisco. So yeah, I do that, and then I charge the client if a newspaper allows it. I would charge for the travel time if there's expenses,
Mhm.
and which goes to another point. So if you're running your own business as a photographer, I think the most important thing outside of the photography and the technical aspects of that is being organized. If
Right.
you can have a way of keeping track of all your expenses, of um, basically keeping track of how many miles you drive, all that pays in dividends once you're doing your taxes, when you have to do bookkeeping. I
Mhm.
have like a spreadsheet where I keep every single expenditure. And I've been doing that spreadsheet since 1999. What,
Wow.
sorry, 1997. So before I was even working as an independent person, I already got into this habit
Mhm.
of just keeping track of every single time I spend money. Because then once I do have to do taxes, or I have to figure out how much of a budget we have per month, like recently with the current downturn, I was able to quickly figure out how much money is going out and how much money is going in, to
Right.
be able to figure out, what,
Mhm.
how, how we need to budget our next few months, possibly years, with the current situation that we're in.
So how do these, news groups and then your other clients become aware of someone like you? Is it a lot of personal just relationships you're introduced by people, or they just see your work somewhere? Like, how does that?
Correct. So, my wife and I, we've been so extremely lucky and
Mhm.
fortunate to have a beautiful network of people that basically maintain connections with us throughout all these years. And partly it's also us, just kind of maintaining a relationship with them that goes beyond the work. So, for example, the Hearst Foundations, the people who work there, we treat them like family.
Mhm.
So, when they have any major milestones, or there's, birthdays, any of that kind of stuff, or if there's an off time for us, we'll go out to dinner with them.
Mhm.
If I had an opportunity to work in Maryland last year in the summer, and basically spent some of the time before I started working with Adobe to hang out with Rainey Gifford, who's the
Yeah.
director of the Senate Youth Program,
Right.
and spend time with her and her family and her kids. And
Mhm.
it's just, yeah, it's those things. It's just
Those
basically,
interpersonal connections and stuff
yep,
like.
yep, and just maintaining those relationships. And I have colleagues who have also strategies of like sending out postcards, and making sure to update their web pages or
Mhm.
their social media presence. And I do a little bit of that, but seriously, I've been so busy for the last 20 years, I haven't really had that much time to update it. So
Right.
once you get rolling and you're kind of out of that early training stage, it's all about time management. And of course, if you have kids, there's an added level of responsibilities. You have to, take them to school, you're volunteering at school. So it's like, if you can get organized early on and have a great way of keeping everything kind of coherently together, then
Mhm.
in the long term, once you start kind of running out of time because you're working so much, it goes a long way.
Right. I agree definitely. What is the major difference when you're working with those news groups versus like the typical nonprofits, education groups,
Mhm.
and the clientele you have today? Like, what are the different is the activities that much different, or?
Well, yes, the way we cover some of these assignments is very different. So, for a newspaper or a magazine or a wire service, they're looking for a much smaller selection of images. So, a lot of times I know exactly what I'm looking for. I'll hone in for certain type of shots that I'm looking for. I might have some ideas before I go to the assignment, or once it's unfolding in front of my eyes, I'll try to capture what's happening.
Mhm.
With these kind of other assignments, large events that we do, like Dreamforce or the Senate Youth Program or Sketchfest, it's so much bigger that basically we're photographing a lot. So, for example, with Dreamforce, I hire other photographers to help me out. There are colleagues that I went to school with or I
Mhm.
worked with at other newspapers, and they're all photojournalists, by the way, because those are people that I know have a great work ethic. So we work together as a team. I hire editors and they help edit. They're also colleagues, people I know. And we put it together, and there's been years where we've had 60, 70,000 pictures that we'll photograph at this event. And we have to curate it fast enough for the client that they can have access to it. And of course, doing all that costs a lot of money because I have to be paying everybody, whatever their day rates are, and it takes a lot of time and effort to put it all together. I have to rent computers. I have to rent a lot of other equipment to make these jobs done. So for like the Senate Youth Program, we rent lights in Washington, D.C. Shout out to F8 Lighting with Ken. Thank you so much for all your great years of service. And yeah, it's so basically it's there's all these other elements that have to go into it that with newspaper work, it was a lot quicker, but of course the turnaround, the expectations are higher.
You have
But
a
what we
smaller time frame, you mean by the turnaround, or?
exactly. So with the newspaper, I need to usually have it done the day of, pretty
Right.
fast. I mean, some of these corporate clients as well, but I also deliver a bigger edit at a later time.
Mhm.
So there's different layers. So with some clientele, they expect images to be turned around on site, and that's why I would need an on-site editor to do. So if it's small enough that I'm the only one shooting, I'll bring Erin on as my editor. Or if Erin gets hired to do a job, she'll bring me on as her editor or assistant, and we basically help each other out like that. So
That's
that's the other thing, brings me to a good point, is if you gonna partner up with somebody that you trust very well. And of course, if it's someone you love,
yeah.
like a spouse or
Uh-huh.
a lifelong partner, yeah, it's makes it so much easier, and we work great together. It's just an amazing partnership we have. We met together at San Francisco State,
Mhm.
and we had a very similar trajectory. She also did an internship in Dubuque, Iowa, like I did, and did
Wow.
one in Albuquerque Journal in New
Mhm.
Mexico. And yeah, we've just had this amazing journey.
Yeah.
And Erin loves to work with nonprofits,
Mhm.
so she'll spend a lot of time of the year traveling to various amounts of locations. So she's been to places like Malawi, Kenya, Uganda,
Mhm.
Rwanda, Guatemala, India,
Right.
Bolivia, Peru. I mean, all these places photographing for nonprofits.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's just amazing body of work that she's done. And I basically support the family at those points where I take care of the girls, take them to
Mhm.
school, make their lunches, do all that. And if I get a job, it's in reverse. So, it's this kind of a working
Right.
familial relationship that, works out great.
Yeah, I mean, was there ever at the very beginning, a competitive edge between, oh, I got this many clientele, and I got this many clientele I'm working, or anything like that? Was there
uh,
ever,
not, I'm not, I don't think of myself as a very competitive person. I like to help others to try to get to a level of performance that they can be. So, like when I was working for a newspaper, I know this is probably not a good thing for papers because the papers compete with each other. But if I see one of my colleagues struggling with something or their lens is not working right, I'm happy to like lend something of piece of my equipment or help them out. Or if I have brought a stool to an assignment, go ahead, use it. Or I have a ladder, use my ladder,
yeah,
because it's like, I feel like if everybody succeeds, it just helps
no,
everyone,
yeah, that's a great,
you
that's
know,
great.
in essence. And it's like when I see a young photographer just starting out and I'm doing an assignment, I'm
Mhm.
happy to go over there and chat with them and say, hey, where are you at? What school did you go to? Are you having any issues? If I can help you out, whatever. I,
Mhm.
I love being able to help somebody, because when I was first starting out, the people that kind of turned to me and helped me were the most amazing people. They were kind of like my angels at work that I worked with. Like for example, a woman I worked with, Lacey Atkins.
Mhm.
She was working for Associated Press at the time, and she became my mentor. There was a mentoring program at the university at San Francisco State, and she basically was the AP photographer, and she'd take me on assignments with her and let me shadow her. And one day she had some things she had to do in the office, and she said, "Look, I got this assignment. Why don't you do it?" She basically gave it to me and let me go out there and do my first AP assignment back. It was like summer of 97.
That-
And it was just amazing thing to be able to do that and get your images on the wire. And yeah, it's great. So I loved that mentorship she provided for me. And I always felt like, okay, the best thing I can do is carry on that tradition of helping the new generation that's coming into the field. And yeah, so
What would you say is probably the most important thing that people don't realize about the whole photojournalism process, photographers in general, maybe? Like, what
mhm.
would you say is a lot of, it goes unnoticed, maybe? that you guys do?
Yeah, so part of photojournalism is, of course, the journalism side. And
Right.
with journalism is you are a storyteller. You're basically trying to show objectively what is happening in front of your lens and doing it in a very professional manner. So what I mean by being honest and truthful is following a certain set of guidelines. Oh,
Oh, look, here we
this
go.
is
We have another
Maya.
guest on the podcast.
Hey, hi Maya. Hold on a second. Let me get Aaron too.
Oh, you're good.
All right, sorry about that.
Oh, no problem.
So we were talking about
I, the
what's that?
value of photojournalism and what
Oh
people don't.
yes, yeah. So ethics. The main thing about ethics that sometimes doesn't get noticed by the general public, and there's a lot of misconceptions about that, is that we cannot, as photojournalists, when we're doing journalism stories, we cannot set up images. And by that means like, orchestrate or make things
Mm-hmm.
that are not the way they are.
Right.
And the other thing that goes hand in hand with that is because of technology, photoshopping, which is a term for composing images
Mm-hmm.
after you took them. So taking one image and putting it together with another. Now, that is okay if you're a photo illustration and you have to clearly state that it's a photo illustration. You might
Mm-hmm.
see that a lot in like the New York Times or Washington Post, where it's kind of like a dreamy looking thing where it's a graphic, an image put together. That's usually what photo illustration looks like. It's pretty obvious that it
Mm-hmm.
was done by a graphic artist. Have images that are supposed to be truthful and they're being meshed together.
Right.
But for some reason they felt like they needed to up the drama by adding these two elements of this of two frames of a very similar situation,
Mm-hmm.
and you could see the same individual in both sides of this soldier that was in the front of the image. And that is just problematic because that
Right.
really reduces the public trust in what we're trying to do and
Mm-hmm.
being objective and being honest. And yeah, it's very unfortunate. And of course, this goes to our current state of affairs, but there is so much, I hate to use the term, but fake news out there
Mm-hmm.
of basically non-journalistic entities spreading information as if it's news. It looks like a real news site, but the people who are putting these stories together are not journalists. They're not following ethics. They are making up sources. They are basically making up the entire story
Mm-hmm.
uh, on the level of like The Onion, which is a purposeful, satiristic
Right.
comedy kind of a newspaper, but instead making it look like it's real news.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the problem. And there's a lot of confusion out there. And I'm noticing it right now with the current pandemic of COVID-19.
Right.
There are so many fake stories that are produced not just here at home in the United States, but also being produced in other countries like in Russia and China and in England and Ukraine and
Mm-hmm.
Montenegro, which I
Right.
think was one of the places that was really involved with some of the election hijinks back in 2016. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's very problematic.
Mm-hmm. Out there.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back, everyone. There's slight
We're
technical
back.
difficulties, but we're back.
Yeah. So, which kind of reminds me, it's okay, whatever answer I was answering before, but this reminds me of a technical glitch that I had when I was working. So I was photographing Bill Clinton backstage at a Dreamforce event. This is years ago, and he had arrived fairly late to the show, so it was
Mm-hmm.
super late. and everything's had been moved back. So we're talking about something that was supposed to happen at like 7 o'clock. We're backstage working at like 10:30 o'clock at night.
Right.
So I'm photographing. I have my flash. I have everything ready,
Hmm.
shooting, and then because I haven't really prepared my mind for what I was doing, I forgot to get extra batteries for my flash. And lo and behold, in the middle of this Bill Clinton meet and greet, my batteries run out.
That
And
is.
I quickly pop them out. And what I do is adapt the light to what the lighting was in the space. Luckily, my camera was able to handle the low ISO, the high ISO,
Hmm.
and I just pivoted. And I don't think anybody noticed because I just kept
Well, there you
working.
go.
And by the end of it, I photographed the last person. Bill Clinton turns to me and said, "Hey, you, do you want to get photographed too?" I'm like, what?
Like,
So he basically had my camera. He said, give the camera over to this guy right here. And it was one of his Secret Service guys, took the camera, I guess was used to this, and
Mhm.
took a few shots off of us, of the two of us. And yeah, Bill asked, so where are you from? I told him, I'm from Poland. And he's like, oh, I know Lech Wałęsa. He came over and we had a great time back in
Well,
DC. So it
I
was
feel
just
like
the
you might
most
have a career
amazing.
in impersonations or something like that if you get time photography thing.
Oh,
So
thanks.
I guess, not take up too much time. What is, if you could give yourself the statement, 20 years ago after all your experience,
Uh-huh.
look back at your 18-year-old self and say, this is what you should know going forward for all those, young aspiring photojournalists out there, what is that line that you have?
Oh boy.
That's a big question.
Yeah, it is. Geez. Well, I probably would have told myself, find some additional revenue streams that are not dependent on having to be photographing in person.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now, I mean,
Right,
goes to what we're in our current situation. We basically are right now scrambling to figure that out because all the jobs that I had booked,
oh,
including Senate Youth Program back in early March, have been canceled.
right.
So, and we've had quite a bit of work lined up all the way into November
Mhm.
that unfortunately has all been canceled. And at this moment, yeah, it's tough right now because we can't really leave the house
Mhm.
under the lockdown orders to do anything. And I don't see any events that are going to be happening with mass gatherings like what we used to
Right.
do for
For a
quite
long.
a while. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're not up and running the way we were in 2019 until 2021, 2022
Mhm.
for real. I mean, the way I'm seeing this and the way it's going to have an impact on us, I could see this going on for a good 36 months from the start of it. So, yeah, that's the difficult part. Luckily, I've been very uh, good, I guess, very diligent about saving every single bit of money since the beginning. I've been putting away for retirement since I started back in 1999. That's something that somehow my 20-year younger self knew to do.
Right.
Thank you so much for doing that. And then also putting money into the savings account just in case if we need to, because the retirement, the IRAs, we can't really touch
Right.
until we get into retirement. So it's there in case we need it. But putting money away just bit by bit, try not to. This is something, a big advice I want to give to everybody is try not to spend money too much on things that are not completely necessary. So every time I need used vehicles,
Mhm.
preferably a Toyota Corolla that's maybe 5, 6 years older than the current year,
Mhm.
because you can get a great deal. Because buy a brand new car a lot, automatically lose thousands of dollars the minute you drive off that lot. It just makes no sense to me. And this is something my dad taught me. It made no sense to purchase a brand new car from the dealership because it was just so marked up. So there's that. And also just don't spend money. If you think you have money in the bank, don't necessarily spend it. So if I needed to buy equipment, what I would do is rent it first to make
Mhm.
sure that I something that I liked working with, but also to use it to get to know it before purchasing it. And then once I purchase it, make sure I have enough cash to pay it off so you don't have credit card debt going month to month. Of course, it's extremely difficult when you're just starting out. I
Right.
totally understand that because you need a set of equipment just to get going.
Mhm.
But if you can find or have a computer that someone gave to you, or you can purchase, I know universities go through computers quite a lot. You can get a decent piece of equipment going to like a university near a home and get
Mhm.
older stock, or for camera equipment, going up to photographers, professionals. I had 11 cameras sitting that I wasn't using anymore. I donated to a few organizations 2 years ago.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just, you can hit up photographers. They'll have tons of gear usually that's a bit older, but it's good enough to learn on. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's that.
Well, thank you again very much. We appreciate this. To all the viewers out there, again, sorry for the technical issues. We're gonna have much more to come. So one more time, thank you again. We
Yeah, for sure. And if
really
anybody's interested in some of the work I've done, if you Google my name, it's Jakub Mosur.
include social media as well in our
Yep,
posts.
it's
Uh,
JAKUBMOSUR, as you'll see. Um, I'm out there. I have a website. I have social media presence. If you're interested in some of the work, I even have a little bit on C-SPAN, which I think you were a witness to.
you can maybe see my tiny little head on some of the stuff in C-SPAN.
Yeah, so we had Brian Lamb interview us at a town hall meeting for the Senate Youth Program on the Friday morning, and I think I got a shout out back in 2018.
I
Uh,
think you did, yeah.
yes, yeah. So it's the only time that's ever happened. It
Mhm.
was an amazing experience, and
That's awesome.
yeah. So if you want to know more, and if anybody out there is following this career path, please reach out to me. Send me an email, send me a text. Would love to see what you're doing, what your portfolio looks like, and if you need any professional advice, I'm happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you again. We really appreciate all this stuff's going to be included. Make sure to follow us at the Ride Along on YouTube and Instagram. See you guys next time.